Attention women's health professionals, the next round of FAM is just around the corner. Classes start on October 4th. FAM is the perfect program for busy women's health professionals who want to offer fertility awareness charting support in their practice. FAM cuts out all the fluff and only focuses on what you need to serve your clients better. Each module, homework assignment, in-class training, and chart review session is there for a reason. Where will you be 9 months from now? With a FAM certification, you'll have a brand new skill set that will allow you to use the menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool and vital sign in your practice. Your confidence in analyzing and interpreting menstrual cycle charts will be at a level you can't even imagine today. And you'll have a brand new offering in your business that will allow you to reach more clients. This knowledge is truly life-changing. Transform your practice in 9 months. You won't regret it. Join us this October in FAM. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMLive to apply today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 480. Today, I'm diving into Unexplained Infertility with Dr. Marc Sklar. If you're not familiar with Marc, he is also known as the Fertility Expert on the socials. He is a natural fertility specialist helping couples get pregnant for the past 20 years. His mission is to help you feel hopeful and confident about your fertility journey again, and his Hope Fertility program has supported thousands of people to get down to the root cause of their fertility issues and find the answers they need to heal and improve their reproductive health, and of course have beautiful babies. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Marc. And I'm really excited to be back again with Marc Sklar. I don't know if this is your third time on the show or fourth time on the show, but I'm thrilled to have you back. We've had so many great conversations over the years, so welcome back.
Thank you. I agree. It's nice. It's been a while, but it's nice to be back. And I think today we'll be talking about something a little bit different than what we've talked about in the past.
Yes, you've always been my go-to sperm doctor, but here we are. And yeah. I noticed in the back, I know this is a podcast, so the listeners won't be able to see it, but I noticed in the back you have your YouTube thing back there. So congrats on, I'm curious what it means. I know you get it at a certain milestone, but congrats on all the success you've had over the years and everything.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, this one was for 100,000 subscribers.
Amazing.
Which is awesome. I don't know when I qualify for another. I have no clue how it works. Usually my team says, hey, there's something here you can get. But yeah, so that happened actually during the start of the pandemic was when I reached that threshold and was able to get that. I was so excited. It brought this bright light to our dinner table when I opened it up, and it was in the middle of the pandemic because everybody was freaking out because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
This was
some levity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Well, and of course, that's for your Fertility TV. So we'll make sure to share all those links and everything. But congrats on that. So, I mean, let's get into it. I feel like we can, for anyone who hasn't heard a lot about you, I can give you an opportunity to share a little bit about who you are and why you're doing this work. But of course, we've covered that extensively in previous episodes. But yes, I'll throw it to you to introduce yourself, and then we can jump into some of the topics of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just to keep it brief, I'm Marc Sklar, a natural fertility expert. I really focus, and my passion is to, one, help couples get pregnant naturally if possible, and two, to help them find the root cause of what's going on. And it all stemmed from the first woman that I helped get pregnant slightly over 20 years ago. And she had PCOS, and, she got pregnant in about 4.5 months. And it was so eye-opening to me to see her go through that and be able to support her through that process, but also to have such a huge impact in her life and her family tree. To me, that was so special. And I always say, I'm fairly certain she does not realize how impactful she was to my life, but she changed my life because that solidified the direction that I wanted to go and why I've done what I've done ever since. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. What a nice story. I mean, maybe she's even listening, probably not, but you never know. But it's really interesting. I always find it interesting how people get into the work that they're doing. But I mean, there is something just incredibly special about helping women to build their families, especially with all the challenges that they face in these times that we are in. And I feel like that's a perfect segue into what we're talking about today. I mean, I feel like we're going to meander a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the whole topic of, quote, unexplained infertility. And some of the topics that come to my mind come from the conversations that I have behind the scenes with clients. And I feel like within the last couple of years, I think these conversations were always being had, but in the last couple of years, at least in the work that I'm doing behind the scenes, I have a lot of clients who are being just discouraged, just incredibly discouraged based on lab results and things of that nature. So, so yeah, lots to get into. I mean, let's talk about unexplained infertility. How would I just like throw that at you and you can just attack it? I feel like it's a big topic.
I will tag on to what you just said before that, which I 100% agree with. I'm hearing that more and more, and I think talking about that, addressing that a little bit today would be helpful for all the viewers and everyone who gets told that. Right? I think the biggest thing for me with unexplained is I think it's an easy way out. I think that diagnosis is the lazy way to tell someone that I don't know what's going on, or I don't want to dig deeper. I think there's very few real unexplained cases out there. And I think there's a lot more answers for those people who have been told it's unexplained than what they've been led to believe. And I think the first thing is just, one, have we done enough evaluation to understand why something like this has happened? And some of it could be self-evaluation on our own. I think I'd like to think we're all objective enough and savvy enough to be able to look at ourselves, look at our history, look at our life, look at our daily lifestyle, and be able to say to ourselves, these are areas that need some attention and support that maybe I'm not as strong in, or I've ignored for whatever reason. And I think those things alone could be reasons why, so to speak, why we can't find an answer. And, those things are things that maybe your regular doctor just can't see and won't really have a lot of feedback for and support for, like, just the amount of stress that you deal with on a regular basis. And have you had a lot of like major traumatic, stressful events in life, and how has that impacted your health? What you're doing on a daily basis around your house, whether it's exercise, sleep, lifestyle, diet, environmental toxins, just general taking care of ourselves. I think those things get pushed by the wayside. And I've heard so many fertility clinics and doctors say, there's nothing you can do about that. That stuff doesn't mean anything. It's not going to impact your fertility. And I'm just telling you from 20 years of seeing this repeatedly, 100%, everything I just mentioned absolutely does. So, but from their perspective, it's just, they're looking at things in a very, very narrow, from a very narrow viewpoint. And so you have to take what they say with a grain of salt and understand that it's unexplained from what they're willing to do or from what they're able to see. But it doesn't mean that there's no real cause that's leading to this. And that's why I'm so passionate about finding root causes for people. But I do think we all need to be more open-minded about what those root causes could be. Because we are trained, we're preconditioned being in the medical model system that we are today. And for our conversation in the United States, but all kind of more advanced Western civilization medical systems are very similar, is that there's all these specialties. And within those specialties, you have a lot of experience within a very narrow range, which is fantastic. But it takes out what used to happen 50 years ago, where like your general provider had a lot of knowledge in a broad range of medical areas, and they could take a step back and start to really assess that from a much broader perspective. And so the specialization is good, but it has taken away that ability to have a broader perspective on your health. And with that comes this unexplained piece that comes in, because they're not looking outside of this, of their field of specialty. And so I say that because we've been preconditioned to believe that all fertility issues are reproductive issues. And I want everyone to hear that not all fertility issues are hormone related, and not all fertility issues are reproductive based. They can stem from other systems like your stress response, like your adrenal glands, which definitely impact your endocrine system. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it might not, your endocrine system might not be the place to start there. It might be the place to end. And so we have to work our way out of that. Digestive issues, huge impact, I find, on reproductive function, and I think is sorely ignored and really needs a lot more attention put to it. And then we have to look at some of the things I mentioned previously. And the biggest one that I think, outside of those, what I call foundational things that I mentioned earlier, the biggest one, which is becoming more and more of a problem every day, is those environmental toxins. And I like to talk about it more and more because of how impactful that is. But yeah, I think those things are huge. And then kind of also coming back, I think I mentioned this just a moment ago, but most of us, we don't get enough testing done. We don't get all the proper labs done. So when someone's giving you that diagnosis of unexplained, is that truly, have they truly looked at every possible lab test? Even just when we're talking about basic foundational hormone tests, I find that so much is missing. And, coming back to a topic that you and I have discussed twice already on this show, I think, is so often they say it's unexplained, but they've never even evaluated the partner in this. And we don't even know what's going on there. So I think there's often so much missing and ignored when we're given that unexplained. And I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but I do find that that is often the case. And I think before we can even venture to that diagnosis, we really need to make sure we've checked off many more boxes than we have.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't heard it put in that exact term before. There's so much that you said that we can address, but when you said not all fertility issues are reproductive issues, and getting people to kind of expand how they're looking at things. And
yeah,
I find it just the power of doctors in their diagnosis. The power is unreal. When a doctor gives somebody a diagnosis of something and says, you have this, it's just incredible how much power that is. And it feels in a way like you're trying to essentially deconstruct that, right? You're trying to, because what does it even mean to say that? It means we don't know. It would be better if they just said we don't know, as opposed to giving you a diagnosis of unexplained fertility. Because just because you don't know doesn't mean it's unknowable, right?
Correct. I 100% agree. And I often think of, I just had this image when you were just saying the almighty physician behind the desk with the white coat. I had this vision of like the Wizard of Oz and the guy behind the curtain, pulling all the strings for everything, right? The wizard there. And so to me, that's this kind of feeling that I have, is that they're pulling these strings and I don't think they realize, maybe they do, I don't know, but I don't know that they realize how impactful and harmful their words are when they're saying what they're saying. And I often think they can probably say the same thing in a much nicer way. They just don't, because they're just not thinking about it. And I think that also happens because they're so used to talking about this that to them, the conversations they're having are normal everyday conversations, but they don't take it from the vantage point of the person listening and hearing, receiving that information. To them, this is all new. It's all foreign. It's all scary. And the words that they're using there have huge potential impacts to how they approach things and change the way we think dramatically. Like when that person across the desk says to you, you can't get pregnant, you need donor eggs, or whatever circumstance they're telling them. Those are not things that these couples forget. And it's hard to take those words out of their head to give them hope and belief that it is possible. So I wish that was certainly different, but I agree with you that it'd be nice if they just said, like, I don't really know what the reason is. Somebody else might be able to figure that out. I can't. But the only thing that I can offer you is IVF as the solution, even though I don't know why. And I think that would be received so differently if they said it that way. Yeah.
It's so funny when you say it that way, because it's like, I don't know what it is. All I can offer you is IVF. I don't really know why. Like if they said that, because that's the truth.
It's the truth.
Of course, they would never say that. They, the big, they,
yeah.
But they would never say that. But I was thinking as well that from a practical standpoint, from the kind of medical complex, that makes sense to say that, because then it leads you into the IVF train, right? Because that's,
Mhm.
and I'm always thankful that we have all of these options.
Yeah.
But IVF, maybe for the person who's offering it, may just seem, like they're offering an appetizer at a restaurant. But everyone I know is really hung up on like the $25,000 or more price tag, right? It's not just
Right.
inconsequential. And it doesn't have 100% success rates. I mean, the success rates aren't necessarily terrible depending on your age category and all of the things. But so this is a very interesting conversation. And I feel like if we distill it down to this whole concept of unexplained infertility, it's really trying to even change the name of it. I feel like when you're given this thing of like unexplained, and that's the diagnosis, they're essentially telling you that no one can, like, I don't know. I just feel like it's so trying to like be very careful with my wording here. Like it's so defeating and essentially kind of like it's almost useless. It's almost telling you like there's nothing you can do. Like no effort on your part is going to do anything. You're just infertile. We don't know why, and nothing's going to change that. I feel like that's how it comes across, right? And so we can stop going on about it, but I feel like hopefully the takeaway for anyone who clicked on this episode, because I'm sure unexplained infertility will make its way into the title, is just that we need to investigate further. Essentially, that's what I'm hearing from you. And just on a side note, I mean, in the work that I do with the menstrual cycle, it's rare, almost never. I hesitate to say never, but pretty much never when I'm working with somebody in this area who has been trying to conceive and they're not, where we're looking at their cycle. I encourage them to have their partner screened. We just do some fact finding, some investigation.
Mhm.
It's very rare that there's it doesn't happen that there's nothing.
Nothing.
Like it doesn't happen. There's always something there that sometimes it's very egregious and very like, wow, no one's asked you about this, but there's always something. It doesn't necessarily result in an immediate pregnancy for everybody, but there's always something. It's never nothing. And I'm sure you found the same thing.
Absolutely. That statement, the way you said it, I think captures it perfectly, that there's always something, maybe big or small. And it doesn't always mean that once we address that we're going to open the door and the pregnancy will happen. We'd like to think that's the case. And it does happen. It doesn't happen in every case, but I agree with you. I mean, that's really what we find is that there's usually something. And what I hope that everyone takes away from this is that they need to take a step back often to give themselves the space to look deeper and find real answers. Because often what happens is we don't take the step back and have a more broad perspective. We take a step forward and create less space and become more narrow in our focus. And I find that doesn't necessarily give us the results and answers that we're looking for. And in the end, like I want everyone to get pregnant. So that's the result we're looking for. But I'd also like for you to have an answer as to why in the same process, right? That doesn't always happen, but that would be ideal.
Well, and in my notes for episode, one of the topics, why unexplained infertility is not a diagnosis and what to do instead. That was one of the talking points, right? So I think that's a powerful takeaway there because it isn't a diagnosis. It's kind of like, it's not a diagnosis because it's not final. It's basically saying we don't know. So maybe we can just have a campaign where we just call it out. Like if you've been given an unexplained infertility diagnosis, we need to switch that language right now. It's we don't
Absolutely.
know. We don't know.com. And that is not a diagnosis. Thank you for attending my TED Talk.
That's great. I mean, it's true, right? We don't know. And you need more answers. You need different support. And that might mean, by the way, for everybody listening, it might mean you might need to seek support from someone who has a different perspective on health and fertility, right? Like the work you do, Lisa, the work we do, it's a different perspective on fertility. And that might be what you need to find answers, right? If you keep doing and going down the same road, you're just going to end up in the same place that you've been.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And I feel like one of the things I talk to with my clients and practitioners all the time is this concept that no one practitioner has all the answers. We don't. No one has all the answers. And I know that I look at things very different from other practitioners because the menstrual cycle is my kind of like, this is my bias here. This is how I look at things. And the acupuncturist has that,
Yeah.
background, and the medical doctor has that background. The surgeon has
Right.
that background. And if we can just start to get our heads around that, I feel like that could help. It helps us. We still need the doctors. We still need,
Right.
these practitioners. And that's something I'm constantly talking clients off the ledge too. It's like, no, we still need the doctors. We still need the specialists. We just need to
100%
understand
correct.
that they don't have all the answers. And
Yeah.
I love what you said about a different perspective. So then in terms of practical steps, I know you listed a few things, and I think I can imagine that it can be freeing, but also a little bit discouraging, I think, to hear like the environmental factors and I think a lot of people's eyes roll back in their heads because then it puts the pressure back on them to change things, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe you could just share some of the things that you have found. I think you did list a few, but I think maybe we can just go back there. So for the person
Sure.
who's listening, who was told, right, I have unexplained infertility, and now they're sitting there trying to figure out what that means. What are some of the things that you found through your investigative work with clients?
Yeah. So I do agree with you. It can be frustrating because I find that when couples work with us, that not all couples, but a lot of them are like, so I came to you for you to do the work for me. Right. So you do the work and tell me, when this is going to happen. And I think we all need to take a little bit more responsibility and active engagement in our overall health, right? And our overall life. So I do ask those couples quite a bit on their part, right? To do quite a bit. And that's very purposeful because whether you're trying to get pregnant or just live a healthier life, and hopefully by finding out these answers and addressing those things and becoming more engaged in your health, you're going to live a healthier life and get pregnant, right? That you realize how valuable that is for you because you're going to start to feel better. You're going to have more energy. You're going to sleep great. You're going to want to do things and live life and have a lot more vitality. And this is what I want for everybody. And I know it's possible because I see it and hear it all the time, but that does require you to be engaged and an active participant in the process. And that's not easy. That's not easy. That's not easy to do on a daily basis, let alone ongoingly. And we have to be kind and gentle and caring with ourselves and flexible. And some days will be easier and some days will be harder, but at least you're going to have the tools to do those things and to ebb and flow with that on a regular basis. And so, yeah, I mean, some of these things that I find digestion is at the top of the list. And even without doing any extensive testing on your digestive system and your gut health to determine what's going on and what else you need to do, I think there's so much that we can do with just general basic changes at home. We all you don't need a book to tell you that you shouldn't be having a lot of sugar. I think we all live in a world where we know that, right? And we don't need a book or a podcast to tell us that we need to stop eating as much processed foods and fast food because we know they're not good for us. They might taste good, but we know they're not good for us. So these are all common sense things. If you go and approach the grocery store and say, I need to get as many things as I can get that allow me to cook fresh at home, then, I mean, that alone will make a huge, significant difference with your overall health. So that's number one in terms of diet. And then two, also quality. The next step would be quality of food that you're eating, making sure that they're organic and have all the proper labels, depending on what product or animal product we're talking about, that they live within that realm. Because yes, I know it's hard to do. I don't disagree with you. And I know that it's more expensive and I don't disagree with you. And so we have to prioritize what we're going to do and how we're going to do that when it comes to changing our diet. But I want us also to take a different perspective on the food we eat. I want us all to think about cooking your food and picking the food at the grocery store for yourself as part of your health insurance plan. Okay. You go and take care of your car, you service your car and you put oil in it and you change the oil hopefully regularly and you put gas in regularly or else it wouldn't run, right? And hopefully you give it a nice wash from time to time and you clean the interior if filters need to be changed. You're doing all these things engaged in your car. None of that is covered by your health insurance. None of it. I'm sorry, by your car insurance, right? None of it. The only thing that's covered by your car insurance is a major issue with your car. It gets broken into, you get in a car accident, God forbid, or whatever, right? Well, we think of our health insurance very, very differently. We think that our health insurance should cover every little bit of our healthcare as possible. And even if that's in a perfect ideal world, that's not what the world that we live in. That's not reality. That's not what your health insurance covers. And most of us really utilize our health insurance for maybe a regular checkup or tune-up once a year, and then anything major. So I want all of us to look at the exercise you do as part of your health insurance, the meditation you do as part of your health insurance, going to the grocery store and the quality of food you look at that you purchase and eat as part of your health insurance. This is all taking care of yourself and allowing your body to run longer and better and healthier, so that you don't develop chronic diseases, so that you don't have these issues, so you don't have inflammation, so that your body can function properly, so your hormones can be balanced, so that you can get pregnant. So I think we all need to have a slightly different perspective on that and really value those things a little bit differently. So if we do those things, then we are taking care of ourselves at the most basic financial foundational place, that we are setting ourselves up for success. So that's also coming back to our diet, like making sure that our gut is functioning properly, that we don't have bloating and constipation and diarrhea, that we feel good and we have regular bowel movements. All of that's super important. A lot of that comes back to, first and foremost, taking care of the food and the quality of food that we eat. Now, if you've done those things and you still have some issues, then I think we need to do some more testing. Then we've got to look deeper at that to find out what are the main issues, so that way we can actually create a plan for that, right, to address it. But this also goes to all the environmental toxins that I mentioned. Like, those are serious things, and we are all exposed to more chemicals every single day. And so this is not about trying to rid your house and your body of every possible chemical. That's not possible. It's not going to happen. But this is about reducing as much exposure as possible and what you can control. But I like to do this slowly. I mean, some people say, I'm just going to change everything. Fine. But this is about just taking baby steps, right? Like, one product runs out, swap it out for something better and healthier. The next product, do the same. You might at certain places need to actually take a more engaged role in that. Like, if you want to swap out your nonstick pots and pans because they're definitely toxic for you, okay, that's a bigger leap forward, because that requires setting up a time, investing the money and so forth. But that is huge as well for you. And then, what are you using on your personal, on your body? What are you using in the house to clean? What are you using in the yard to take care of your plants and the weeds and so forth? Like, are you still using Roundup, even though it causes cancer? Like, is that something that we're still doing? And if so, then what are we going to do? Now, you can't change what your neighbors are doing. You maybe could have a conversation and educate them, but you can't change them. You can only change what you can control. And I think that's where this comes back to, is like, what can you do, and at least have peace of mind that you're doing as much as you can on your end within reason to kind of take care of those things. And unfortunately, we're going to have more things in the future because there's new chemicals, new things that are coming out. All of that is playing a role in our health and how it impacts us.
Mm-hmm. So important. And as you were talking about these things, so, for me, when I make these types of suggestions, I feel like from that kind of coaching perspective of like, how do you motivate somebody to make these changes? I feel like I have a shortcut or like a special key, because when you have the cycle and you're tracking it to the degree to which the clients do in the programs where we're looking at mucus, we have a whole mucus charting system with all these numbers and letters. And so we can really track some kind of very subtle changes in the cycle, and you can see it. So I
100%.
don't, I find that I don't necessarily have a hard time. It's not me sitting there trying to, convince you that, the sugary foods were causing you issues with hormones, when you can see what happens in the cycle, whether it's whatever it is, lengthening of the luteal phase, reduction of period, whatever, you can see these tangible things. So, for someone who isn't charting their cycle or who hasn't necessarily gone down that rabbit hole, how do you motivate? I mean, I suppose there's tons of other things. I think symptoms are probably a big one.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that your average person who has not gone down these rabbit holes may be struggling to see how this links to fertility.
Yeah. So motivation, I hope, comes back to how they feel. And I agree with you, like menstrual cycle is a huge thing to monitor. I'd also say blood work is a huge thing to monitor your hormones, tracking one thing to the next. So an interesting example of this is, and this might go down a different rabbit hole of a topic, but we have a member of my program who has been really struggling to get her hormones in check, and her cycles have been all over the place. And she's done all the things and still has been struggling. And so we had this conversation with her that we think it's maybe about time for her to remove her breast implants. And she did that. And the magic that happened afterwards, the shift that we saw in her cycles, the shift we saw in her hormones, her FSH went, and I can't remember the exact numbers. I wish I could, but I'm not looking at it. I think almost from like 80 or 90 to within normal range. I mean, I want to say it was down to 12 or something like that. I can't remember the exact shift, but it was dramatic. So this is I was just talking about toxins, right? Like that's what implants are, and that's what we're putting into our body, and that's what's there. So I do think that's a big contributor, and that's a hard thing to let go of because there was a lot attached to those when they decided to do that. And now letting go of that is a big change in another direction. I was really proud of her for being able to do that. But it was profound to see that change. So, in terms of tracking, there's a lot of different things we can track. First and foremost, I just want you to feel better. And seeing those hormones change is not enough for me if you still tell me you feel crappy, right? So I'd like to see all of those things change simultaneously. They don't always. And if that's the case, then there's another layer of something that we've got to deal with, something else that we've missed or we've got to address. But truly, my hope is that they even if you didn't even think anything was wrong before, like maybe you said you felt fine before, what typically I see is that their level of understanding of what's capable in terms of how they can feel is stuck at what they only know as their reality. So if they were at 50% functioning and they thought that was 100, then they think this is all that's possible. And then when you clear out all of those things, they usually bump up to another level, whether like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I could have this much energy, or I could sleep this well, or I could feel this good, because they just didn't know what was possible until they eliminated those things. So sometimes it's hard to quantify that progress and what we're trying to track, but often we can see change, just like you mentioned earlier.
As a women's health professional, you already know the value of tracking the menstrual cycle, but I'm guessing that you're not comfortable interpreting complex charts, weird mucus patterns, abnormal bleeding, or other similar situations. You're passionate about fertility awareness and want to use it in your practice, but you're just not sure where to start. That's where FAM comes in. The next class of FAM is just around the corner. Registration is now open for the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. Classes start on October 4th. By the time you finish your FAM certification, you'll have the skills to confidently teach fertility awareness to your clients, interpret all kinds of complex charting scenarios, and you'll have the step-by-step protocols you need to help your clients improve their hormone and menstrual cycle health. Apply today at fertilityfriday.com/FAMlive. And when you apply, we'll send you the details to join one of our upcoming information sessions. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMlive. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. Well, I love that example. And I feel like it highlights so many different things at the same time. One, which is that I'm broken record over here, the menstrual cycle is a vital sign. Yeah. And one of the things I often say to clients is, we do all the things like the foundational factors. I'm sure we have similar foundational things because foundational things are foundational, right? So I'm pretty sure there's similar things. But when you do all those things and the results are not there, it doesn't mean like you have some like I always say stuff like this. I'm like, it doesn't mean you have some random I feel like everyone, in a way, like we all want to be like the exception to the rule, like the
Right.
one person in the whole of science who has this rare disease. And it's probably not that. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's so this is just, I feel like, no, you're not the one. Like you didn't win the lottery. It's probably something
Right.
explainable. And so and it also leads into the conversation I want to get into about, AMH and FSH and those hormone markers, because again, I feel like I get these questions, like how do I lower FSH? It's interesting because I find that it's almost like you think that you have a condition called high FSH when really what you have is a scenario where your ovaries are not responding to the hormone, and that could be caused by a whole bunch of other things. And so really the question we shouldn't be asking is how do I lower my FSH, right? Although that is what we want to do,
Right.
there's usually something else we should be asking to indirectly get there.
That's a symptom.
Exactly.
It's a symptom. And I think we don't think of that as a symptom. We think of that as the diagnosis, right? Like high FSH is my diagnosis, or even low ovarian reserve is my diagnosis, because that's what we've been told. But in reality, and I'll tell you, I've heard fertility IVF doctors say this exact thing. Those are symptoms. So if those are symptoms, that means there's something else causing that to happen. And so the natural answer or question then would be, well, what is that? And how do we figure that out? Right. And so I think that's a huge, huge point that's being missed, because we do focus exactly on that. I'm focused on my AMH or I'm focused on my FSH. Well, one thing I can tell you all, that in the beginning of this year, I want to say it was the end of last year, December or January of 23, that there was an article that came out in Fertility and Sterility, which is the main research magazine for American Society of Reproductive Medicine, where they said that your hormone biomarkers, your AMH, your FSH, your inhibin B, are not good predictors of your ability to conceive and have a baby. So then we have to say to ourselves, so what's the value of these numbers, right? Well, why do we test them? Well, we test them because they are valuable. They give us an insight to where you are today. But if we attach to them thinking that this is the only thing and this is the thing, then that's where we go wrong. Right? This is just a piece. It's one variable. It's one part of the puzzle among all these other puzzle pieces that we need to account for. And so it also gives us understanding that something's wrong because these numbers are not where we want them to be. And so it allows us hopefully to then say, again, like I mentioned earlier, take that step back and say, well, why is this happening? What is contributing to this? What is going on? And I think that's where that becomes valuable. That's why that becomes valuable, because I've seen women with FSHs of 20 and above get pregnant. I've seen women with AMHs at 0.01 get pregnant. So in and of itself, that's not telling me you can or cannot get pregnant. It's telling me that something's wrong. And then we need to start to look deeper. And that's where doing some of the more advanced assessments. So like what we had talked about earlier is kind of that self-reflection of all those different systems and some of those foundational areas. I know no one likes to hear this, but I think stress is like one of the biggest variables that I think influences these numbers considerably. And when we have those women who are diagnosed with like premature ovarian failure, they're young, their AMH is low, their FSH is high, maybe they're not even menstruating regularly. We've got to find out why, because it's not normal for a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old or even 35-year-old, we could even go up to 40 to lose their cycles, to have these numbers, these irregularities in their numbers. So we have to start to understand why and what's contributing to that. And so that's where I start diving deeper into more tests. Like once those foundational labs are all done and we understand what's there and what's not, then we dive deeper. What I will say is common things that we find in the foundational areas is inflammation, lots of inflammation, lots of blood sugar issues, okay, lots of thyroid issues. Some of those things come back to pituitary function and lots of stress issues. So those are like things that we find just in the basic foundational workups that we do. And then from there, if we're going to dig deeper, I come back to digestive health and the gut health. So that's there, right? And we definitely, that's where I would be doing more stool tests and so forth to get a better understanding for what we find there and how it's contributing. Doing more advanced hormone tests like the Dutch test, looking at environmental toxins. So I've recently been doing a lot more toxin panels on members of the program, and the results are really astonishing, quite frankly. Like levels off the chart in so many places that really scares me, because we also live in a place where we know, like, oh, plastics are bad for us. Like we shouldn't be cooking in them and we shouldn't be drinking out of them. So I make the assumption, right or wrong, I make the assumption that, okay, well, I'd like to think that most people are already doing some of those things. And then to still find those levels of toxins and chemicals, to me, is just really eye-opening and tells me that either they were so high and the bodies can't get rid of them, or they're really still being exposed to them in some place, and we need to figure that out. Maybe it's a combination of both. So those are that's my initial thought when I start to see those things, is like, how do we approach this and where do we go?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole lot right there. It made me think of years ago, I went to a conference in Toronto, and one of the speakers was Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, the author of the textbook of natural medicine, I think. So
Yeah.
and he did this presentation, and it was pretty wild. It was about toxins. And I just vaguely, you did. Yeah. I remember this slide, and it was this slide, and it had just a zillion papers on it. And it was all talking about toxicity and how he's making all these links. And it was basically, after that, you get, I guess what I'm trying to say is similar to what you're saying. I think this is kind of the underlying thing that's probably there for most of the people that isn't necessarily being adequately addressed, where we have no idea how much toxicity. And one of the things that he said also, which is valid, is that people have varying levels of ability to excrete toxins. And so different people are able to clear stuff better than others. It doesn't mean we're not all toxic, but there's some people who then they don't have an ability to clear it. So even if they're not necessarily overexposed, they just accumulate it. So it's a whole problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the slow drip. You've got this bucket and the water's just dripping in 1 drop a day. And so you don't really notice it until it's overflowing. And then you're like, oh, wow, there's a big problem here. And that's exactly what we're dealing with. But yes, I have listened to his lecture. I think he was one of the founders and still teaches at Bastyr University, if I'm not mistaken. And it's super powerful.
Wild.
It's wild to recognize that. And I actually often have to not think about it, because it's paralyzing.
Terrifying.
Right. It's paralyzing. My wife often says to me, so what can we eat now?
Well, because I remember one other thing that comes to my mind all the time is that he was talking about diabetes, and he has a team of researchers, right? So like, I'm just picturing this slide and all these papers. But what was interesting is that if I remember correctly, was explaining that the number one kind of correlate to diabetes was not sugar consumption at all. It was toxins. So there were people that had high levels of sugar exposure who, if they were not toxic, did not have diabetes. But if they were toxic, because the toxins would interfere with the receptors for insulin and all, this is a whole thing. And that just challenges your whole opinion about the whole situation.
Yeah. Right. Well, if someone was just given, I was in the mall with my kids a week ago, and I stopped to grab a cup of tea, and the same place that sold tea sold all sorts of like sweets and ice creams and whatever. And so the family in front of me, this woman was severely overweight, and she had 3 kids, all also overweight. And she was giving them whatever that sugary thing was. And I'm just looking at it thinking to myself, like, can't we learn from, the situation I'm in right now and change that for our kids? And that's hard to do. But my mind was thinking about these chemicals, and I was thinking to myself, just like you mentioned, it's one thing to give somebody a spoonful of sugar, right? It's another thing to give them a spoonful of sugar that's wrapped in all these chemicals.
Well, but where does the sugar come from, right?
I
could even go there.
Right. But that's kind of like what's happening, right? It's one thing to do that. It's another to do the other, which is much more toxic and difficult for us to manage.
Yes. Well, I mean, toxins is I suppose maybe to wrap this up, because toxins could be the whole show. It could be an entire podcast, not
Yeah.
like an episode, like a whole,
Oh,
like start a new
separate
one.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's terrifying. It really,
Yeah.
really is. If you get into that research about toxins, it just dizzies your brain and it's just absolutely terrifying. But I mean, fortunately, there's things that we can do to some extent. So share with us then how you support your clients with this issue. Like, should everyone run out and get a hair and mineral analysis now? Like, what do we need to do?
Well, I do think it's helpful to, and I wouldn't, I do ours through blood, but I think it's helpful to see what areas are elevated, because that helps to focus where we need to spend more energy, right? Like if your levels, let's just say for glyphosate, are really high, then you're being exposed to Roundup someplace. And so then you need to be more critical of that, right? Whereas, somebody else, let's just say their BPA levels are extremely high. Okay, well, their approach is going to be slightly different in terms of how they address and start to lower those things. So the first step that needs to happen is understanding, in a perfect world, is what are my levels when it comes to these chemicals? And then two, it's eliminating or reducing dramatically our exposure to those things. If we can't do the first, then we just need to start eliminating wherever we can our exposure to these chemicals. And that's where I started earlier, which was like, okay, so my skincare products, my personal products, I'm going to swap those things out. By the way, for everybody that goes into like tampons and pads, right? It's same thing. And then the things that I come in contact with the most. So I would go to food and how I cook my food next. That would be the next stage. And then really just starting to peel away, quite frankly. By the way, all those new car smells and all those new furniture smells that we all kind of think are like, I love the smell of my new car. That's all
the mattresses. That's my personal pet peeve.
That's all off-gassing of chemicals that we're exposing ourselves to. So buying used is great. There's you mentioned mattresses. There's lots of mattress options that don't use chemicals. We've done that in our house, and it's like, you open up the packaging and you're expecting it to smell, and it doesn't smell like anything, which tells you you've done good. So those things so I'm not saying this to overwhelm anybody. I'm saying this to make you aware. And then you can slowly start to make decisions that help you in that area. And then it's also about supporting our bodies. Like, what can we do to help support that detoxification process as well? So this is where vitamin C comes in. This is where NAC comes in, because they can help with those things. We have some detox protocols that we use on our side, depending on what we find. But really, the piece is exposure, right? Like, that's the first best way of detoxification, because if not, it's this constant uphill battle.
Well, and I can imagine in your practice, because you actively incorporate the labs and you're looking at specific levels of things, you're going to see higher levels for people who are actively using them right now. So you can see that then dramatic kind of change.
Yeah.
You still have to deal with the detox, but the first part is like, stop exposing yourself to toxins, and then we can address the detox process.
Yeah.
So, there's a million directions we could go, but before we start wrapping up, I want to ask you about I kind of want to go back to AMH for a minute, because this has been a thing. So I'll tell you just a couple of the things. I'm sure you're hearing the same things. So I've had a number of clients who are, they have really low AMH numbers, which is sometimes I find these things ironic, because these are often clients who are in their late 30s, early 40s. So we wouldn't expect them to have the AMH of 20-year-olds, to begin with. But either way, they're being told, and the AMH is low. But the way that the doctor then communicates this to them is, A, you're going to go into early menopause. B, you'll never be able to have children on your own. C, you'll need to have donor eggs. D, it's just, this is how it's being communicated. And so I have spent, I feel like, the last couple of years talking a number of clients off the ledge, because, and the other thing too, that they are told about the AMH is that it's fixed, it's immovable, it can't change. I believe I've had a few clients tell me that maybe they were told it was even hereditary. Like, maybe your grandma's had a low AMH or whatever. So just throwing you a little softball there.
Yeah. So I do think that for very few, not a lot, it can be hereditary. Like there could be some genetic issue that has led you predisposed to this. So I don't want to discount that, but I don't think I think that's a very small percentage, very small percentage. First and foremost, I think the thing that everybody listening needs to hear about this is that AMH is not static, and I see it change and go up all the time. That is first and foremost. So I want you to hear that. I want you to digest it. I want you to know that it is possible to change. I also want you to know that it's just a number. You need one good egg per cycle to get pregnant. One. If AMH is an indicator for how many eggs you have, and I'm going to actually extrapolate that a little bit more and say how many eggs you have in that cycle, okay, not forever, then if you're trying naturally, you're only going to release in most cases one egg anyway. Like all I need is one good one. So if I'm only producing one egg a month anyway, let's just make it great, right? Like that's fine. The reason why that's important is if you're going to IVF, that is going to, and why they put so much value on it is because it lowers their numbers. Because if AMH is low and you don't have a lot of eggs to work with on an IVF cycle, then their numbers go down, their statistics go down, and they don't have a lot of options for you. So that's why that's valuable. And that's why they tell you those things. Because yes, if you're going to go through IVF and your AMH is very low and you don't have a lot of eggs, then yes, they're going to tell you that your better option is to do donor egg because that's what's going to get results with IVF. But it doesn't mean that you can't get pregnant. And it doesn't mean that you're going into menopause. And it doesn't mean that you only have one egg left. Like we get all worried. So you will still have eggs when you go into menopause. You still have eggs. It's not like there's zero. So you shouldn't think that you have none. And we don't know what this number correlates to, right? Like, so let's just say your AMH is 1. I don't know. Does that mean you've got 100 million or 10 million or 1 million eggs left? Like we don't know. We just know that the higher that number, typically we see more eggs, and the lower that number, we see less. But it doesn't mean that if they see that number and then they do an antral follicle count and only see a couple of eggs, it doesn't mean you only have 2 eggs left. Because I hear this all the time. They told me I only have 2 eggs. No, that's not the case. And I doubt they were really trying to say that. They just didn't explain themselves. But they see 2 eggs on that cycle. The next cycle, you might have more, right? So the reality is, as long as you've got eggs, and you're menstruating and ovulating regularly, you've got a chance to get pregnant. Now, we just need to support those eggs and make them as healthy as we can. And that comes back to everything else we've been talking about in this episode. But that's the reality. So it's really frustrating to me how much we value this one parameter. I have all different theories also around it. Like, I don't think the number you get when they tell you your AMH tells you everything. I think they're telling you that the AMH of all the follicles you have left, all the eggs you have left. But in reality, I don't think so. I think your body's protecting some of them. That AMH marker doesn't pick up all of them because they're dormant. And so you are only testing really the ones that are next up to be used, in that line, like in the next 1, 2, maybe 3 months. That's really what you're testing when you're testing that number when it comes to AMH. But I also say one of the bigger issues I see about this is, which I do think is a big problem, is someone might do IUI or IVF. They'll use medication, even like a natural cycle, but they're taking some medication and trying it home. And then the doctor says, let's test your AMH so we know what to do moving forward. And that number's lower than what it was, let's say 6 months ago when they initially tested it. And now they're all concerned. And the doctor's saying, see, your AMH went down. We've really got to move faster now and move towards IVF. Well, the reason why that number went down is because you were just taking all the stimulation medication to pull more eggs out. So that's why when you go and test it later, or like shortly thereafter, that you're going to see that number drop. It's super common to see. So I don't want you to get freaked out about that. I want you to understand why. And maybe that's not the best time to take your AMH. Maybe we need some space between the meds and the next time you check it so that you can see what it's really like.
Oh, that's just so there's so much there that is good. So I hope that anyone who has been hearing this kind of stuff from their practitioners is really absorbing it. In fact, hit rewind and listen to that again. Like put it in the morning, listen to it every. But jokes aside though, I recently had a woman contact me. It was really interesting. She had come off birth control. I believe if I remember correctly, she's about 38, 39 or something. She's around my age. And we did a whole episode on it. It was very interesting. She had tested her AMH kind of a month out of coming off of birth control. It was super low and the whole thing. She was told that she won't be able to get pregnant, just menopause, like the whole thing. But she proceeded to have it tested, the AMH and FSH and a few other markers a few times. I don't remember exactly the time frame because I don't have it in front of me, but let's say, 6 months out, a year out, whatever. So you could see the progression. It normalized, because that's what the research says, right? And so, again, there's so many examples in the literature of AMH fluctuating for different reasons that they have on record. So It's incredible that to this day we're told that. So hopefully at least what we've talked about has been empowering for anybody. I think that's the first step to realize that these diagnoses are not these life sentences. And at the end of the day, doctors are people. They don't have crystal balls. They don't know all of the things. And it's interesting staking so much on one modality, the same modality that if you did go on your own to work with someone from a different perspective who supported you to detoxify and to improve those foundational factors so that you can feel better, feel healthier, have better hormones, have a better overall composition, and then you were to conceive, they tend to dismiss the conception as a miracle or something random. They tend to dismiss all that hard work that you had to do to make it happen as just some fluke that occurred.
Yeah, they do. I think in just mentioning about that woman who did the birth control, and then I'll come back to that, is, birth control suppresses your ovaries. So just like I said, it's down regulating. Of course your AMH is going to be lower. And then if you give it time like she did, it's going to go up, right? So I think that's really valuable piece to take out of what you just said. And I forgot that other statement you just mentioned.
Well, I kind of forget it too, but I think it was just the overall kind of don't take this.
Dismissing. Dismissing. Sorry. Dismissing the results that people get when they do seek out another modality. Like, I don't think there's any reason to dismiss them. Everybody can get results in different ways, and different models support different individuals. But I think the most important thing that I want everyone to take out of this is I'm all for IVF and IUI. There's a place for it. And I'm not saying they're not. They were created for a reason. And I think they're super, super valuable and important in reproductive health and treatment. However, I think they're used too much and often too early as a first line of treatment unnecessarily. And I think if we all take a step back and support ourselves the way we were just discussing in this episode, first, give yourself a fair chance to conceive. And if then you haven't, then going down that road is appropriate. And what you've done also is you've created a better environment for you to be successful faster and hopefully more easily if you have to go down that road of IUI and IVF. And I would love to see that happen much more. I think that's a much better approach. And I think because I'm actually scared that that's going to happen less. And here's why: because IVF has become so commonplace now and so mainstream that when someone tries for 6 months, their first step is not their OB. It's, I need to call the fertility doctor. And when you go to a fertility doctor, what are they going to offer you? They're going to offer you IVF because that's what they do. It's like going to see a surgeon and saying, what do you think I should do? Well, we need to take it out, right? Or whatever it is. So I just want us to have that perspective and understanding, and hope that we all can take a step back a little bit more frequently, have a little bit more perspective more often, and give ourselves a chance to make change and become pregnant.
Yes. Everything you said. I feel like that's a wonderful place to kind of draw to a close. This has been just an amazing conversation. And honestly, you and I could just talk all day. Like we could, and we would never run out of things. I have 36,000 more questions that I could ask you. I have them written down, but I'm not going to, so that we can, wrap up at some point. But I wanted to thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise and encouragement. It's so important to just share, like you said, a different perspective. So with that in mind, let us know all the places. Tell us what's happening in your world, where the listeners can find you, learn more about you, work with you, all the things.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about that plaque over there. So my favorite thing to mention is my YouTube channel, Fertility TV, because tons of great resources for everybody watching. You can always find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Fertility Expert and on my website at marcsklar.com. But if anyone's interested in working with me, then I do have a program that I support couples in called my Hope Fertility Coaching Program. And that would be the main way that someone could work with me directly.
And I love that you said couples because it means the men are not off the hook, which is
Absolutely,
my favorite
they're
part.
not. Yeah.
Love it,
listen to our other episodes about
right?
that.
We're putting them all on blast. All right. Well, thank you so much, Marc. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/480. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Marc. Always a pleasure having him on the show and always refreshing to hear his perspective. It's just insane that in this day and age, women are still being given this diagnosis of unexplained infertility and basically being told that there's nothing they can do. They just have no idea what's going on and really giving them the only option to be artificial reproductive technology when there's so much more available in terms of testing. And certainly I would say this is one of the benefits of fertility awareness cycle charting in the sense that when you consider your menstrual cycle, your hormone cycle, when you consider your reproductive capacity to be a vital sign, then we don't just look at it like, oh, well, you can't reproduce. It's okay. Some people can't. Like, it's not really, we shouldn't be looking at it like that. As a healthy human being, having optimal reproductive function is something that is a sign of health, similar to having your other vital signs in check. And we shouldn't be looking at it in a sense of like, oh, some people just can't conceive. I think when there are significant fertility challenges, we should be looking at it as a health indicator that there is something happening, that there's something wrong. And there is. When we do look at it that way, and when you are able to really investigate and determine what's going on, what happens is you do find potential reasons for why this is happening. And even in my practice, I've never worked with a client where there was just we have no idea what's going on. There's always something. There's always a reason. There's always something underlying a challenge that we can identify. So hopefully this episode has given you some hope, some additional information, a new perspective, and even just the concept, going back to the concept that I share in the fifth vital sign of the boardroom analogy, where, as someone with a health challenge, you can picture yourself sitting at the head of the boardroom table, and then who's around your table? It shouldn't just be one person. So, if you're dealing with fertility challenges, yes, you should have a fertility specialist that you're working with. You may have a family doctor also. You may have a different type of doctor, like an endocrinologist, or if you have a specific type of challenge, but you may also have a nutritionist. You may also have an acupuncturist. You may also have a functional medicine doctor. You may also have a fertility coach, or you may also have a fertility awareness charting instructor. You may also have, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it's useful, especially when you're dealing with a specific health challenge, to remember that there's no one practitioner that has all of the answers. And if you're being told that there's absolutely nothing that they can do and there's no reason why this is happening and all that kind of stuff, then it means that it's time to look for another member of your healthcare team who's willing to actually look deeper and help you to solve this issue, because there is something wrong. It's not normal to have these types of challenges, and it's not just something we should be accepting. So on that note, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the Fertility Friday podcast, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you to not only teach fertility awareness to your clients, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Our next class starts on October 4th, so there's still time to reserve your spot. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/famlive. When you apply, you'll have the opportunity to join one of our upcoming information sessions for additional details. There are no other programs like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.